Hey there, guys, and welcome. Today, me and Javi are going to be discussing a now banned book in Tennessee, a comic book written by Art Spiegelman, published in 1991. It depicts Spiegelman interviewing his father about his experiences as a Polish Jew and being a Holocaust survivor. The work employs postmodernist techniques and represents Jews as mice, Germans as cats, and Polish people as pigs. In 1992, Maus became the first and so far only comic book to win a Pulitzer Prize. We hope you guys enjoy.
All right, so I'm checking out the podcast, and I hear, once again, to reiterate, I see the book is banned, right? And I'm like, I checked the year real quick, and I'm like, it's 2022, and they're still banning books. Like, what the fuck? It's weird, man. It's a weird phenomenon to really hear those terms, And there's a whole bunch of books, and of course, so to really clarify, it wasn't banned like in the United States or overall. It was banned in Tennessee. Right? So the book we're talking about, if you're watching with our new visual, we're uploading visuals now for the AMC section. Hey. What's up? Ultimately, in Tennessee, in the curriculum, the book Maus by Art Spiegelman was banned. Now, if you want to give a little sum of what is Maus, Javi?
Maus is an amazing tale by Art Spiegelman. It's about it's a mix of a lot of things.
For sure.
Because there's a great blurb on the back that I think sums it up pretty well before I say anything to the actual content.
Yeah.
But the blurb on the back says, a remarkable work, awesome in its conception and execution, at one and the same time, a novel, a documentary, a memoir, and a comic book. Brilliant, just brilliant.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
And I think that's the best way to sum it up, because this book is kind of all of those things. Yeah. It's a documentary, it's a memoir, but it's also a comic book. Yeah. It's about Art Spiegelman's father and how he's a Holocaust survivor and his story. Yeah. But not only is it about that, it's also about the life in present day between Art and his father.
Yeah. And post-Holocaust and everything.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes you down this lane of ultimately the main character Artie, who is called that by his grandfather, and he's trying to find out, he wants to write comic books, which he actually does. You know? And he's like, hey, I want to hear about your story. His father doesn't think his story is that interesting, but Artie's like, I want the world to know this story because it's important. And I think that's why it's so important to talk to your grandparents. I have, again, your enemy and my friend Brian. He tells me, he's like, hey, you should really talk to me. He's like, talk to your parents about how they got to this country and how they arrived here and what they did before they were, I was born and stuff like that. And he really emphasized that because he gave me his background story of a lot of things. And it's a real crucial thing. And, your parents have a life, before you,
Yeah.
And even if you can't communicate to those people in particular, storytelling is one of the most important ways that we ever got to communicate our stories in music, in the history of it, right?
There's a great episode of Master of None. I don't know if you ever seen it.
Oh, I know. There's a comedian, right?
Aziz Ansari.
There we go. He's funny.
And there's a whole episode where he and his friend are like, we should get dinner with our parents. We should try to get to know our parents better because we're both immigrants. Or both our parents are immigrants. We should get to know them more and learn their story. Yeah. The whole episode is about their parents and what they used to do as kids in their home countries before they came to the U.S.
Yeah, man. When I go to some other job that I have, right, and there's
oh yeah,
when I make that money, there's this sticker on the fridge that says "Son of an Immigrant," And ultimately, that's what the fuck I am. I'm trying to say, it really is something like that. And so, what I was trying to say is that when it comes to storytelling, right, the history of music, one of the most important things that I've learned is that, before writing stuff down, before, lyrics of songs and stuff like that, when it comes to organized music and all that, how slaves, they would pass on their stories is by singing the songs, because you wouldn't write anything down or anything. It would just sung, and then that's how you passed on stories. One of the biggest way we've passed down information is through songs.
Yeah,
and I think it's a very beautiful thing. And another quote in the book that I think is very important, that again, Art Spiegelman is Jewish and his father is Jewish and his father is a Holocaust survivor. But when you open up the book, one of the quotes that's there is this quote: "The Jews are undoubtedly a race, but they are not human." And that quote is by Adolf Hitler. And that's fucking crazy. First of all, at Whoopi Goldberg, her dumbass. For those who don't know, Whoopi Goldberg was in hot fire for saying that the Holocaust was not about race and it was about like a man-made so-and-so. And she got into some heat, only got suspended for 2 weeks. And this is not my take on her being deserving more of a punishment or not. I just think that's a very intense thing for her to say, especially when now, we'll get more into this later, but some people today don't think the Holocaust even happened.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
That's a whole thing.
Yeah. And so to me, that's like people thinking that slavery didn't exist. You know, when of course it obviously happened, you know. So, you know, how offensive is it to say the Holocaust didn't exist to a Holocaust survivor with you know, the numbers on their arm and stuff like that. And
yeah,
I mean, we'll get more into it in a bit because I got a lot to say about this fucking book. But Jesus fucking Christ, that shit is crazy. So Whoopi Goldberg, I don't know, man. Come on the podcast. Yeah, so
I'll something that I'll point out pretty quickly is that something that I caught on is that this is a comic book, but this comic book isn't about superheroes, anything like that. And so which I always think is funny because when a comic isn't about superheroes, people love to refer to it as a book. They're
really,
because
I didn't know that.
Well, because in the world of comic books, we refer to comics as books all the time.
Yeah.
Like when you read an issue, you're like, oh, this is a good book. That's how we refer to issues in the comic world.
Okay.
But I've always seen it more commonly received that outside of the comic world, when people read comics like Mouse, they refer to it as a book. They don't like to call it a comic book.
Interesting. Because I would call it a comic book just of the what's it called? The form of it, the way it's, you know, expressed.
I mean, yeah, it's a medium.
Yeah,
it's a medium.
Yeah.
But I think there's still a stigma against comic books, and people still kind of look at comic books as silly or maybe or maybe a little childish. So I think when you call something a comic book, it might come off as like degrading.
Gotcha.
They want to refer to it as a book because when you say something is a book,
it's like, oh, sophisticated.
Fancy. Oh, I read quite a tale the other day about the Holocaust.
I read the encyclopedia for fun.
So I think So I just want to throw that out there because I always think that's funny because it's like just call it a comic.
Yeah, I never thought about that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That even if you kind of say like, yeah, I'm reading this comic book, you're like, oh, this guy's just fucking hugging around. But then it's like, no, I'm reading a book. It just those things matter, I guess, to some people. But realistically, I personally think, and you know more knowledge about me than comic books, but I look at this as a comic book immediately. Just not because of the cover, but once you open up any first page, you see talking bubbles,
the panels.
Yeah. And one of the most important things to express about this book is that, so obviously this book is about, scared the fuck out of me. For those who are listening, Link, Javi's dog just jumped in my hand, scared the shit out of me, bro.
I saw the color flush out of you.
Oh my God, bro. And you'll be able to check that out on the visual. Thank you, Link. Thank you. One very crucial element to this story is that there's Jewish people, there's Polish people, and there's Nazis. And the way they're depicted is that the Jewish people in the story are mice. The Nazis, the Germans, are cats. And the Polish people, they're pigs.
Yeah.
And so I think that's very important, especially when we get down to the reasoning of why this book was banned. What do you think? Do you think we should get into the ban first or the book first? Book first.
I would say let's get into the band first. But before we do, a thing I wanted to point out too is that what I say dictates this as a comic so much too is that something that because as an anecdote, I read this book in middle school.
Awesome.
I had a Jewish English teacher that wanted us to read this book. She put this book on her curriculum for a reason. And I remember reading this book. I had a crush on that teacher. She was so beautiful.
Nice.
Oh my God.
How we love the Jews.
But
Chutzpah, you know?
Hey,
all our Jewish audience, these motherfuckers.
If it weren't for her, I would never have read this book. And if it weren't for her beauty, I probably wouldn't have cared.
Hey man, whatever it takes.
Who knows? I'm a dumb boy. Anyways.
Jews need love too.
But I read this book in middle school and it shook me even then where I was like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe this. And like, this was sort of my introduction of learning about the Holocaust and everything that happened to Jews and everything like that.
Yeah.
But So rereading it again was pretty eye-opening because I haven't read this book since middle school.
And you receive it differently when you read it much more later on, especially when you read it younger. You kind of have this little glimpse into what it is. But the older you grow, you can understand the severity of it.
Yeah, you don't have like the full context of the world when you're that young.
Yeah. If I may say also real quick, I think that's really important what you say, that you had a Jewish teacher that put this in her curriculum, because when I was trying to buy this book, it's hard to buy the collect set. But one of the sources you can buy from, and you can buy too, is the American Jewish Association, or if I'm not mistaken, we'll put it up in the supplementary to make sure that's there. But I mean, the fact that even they're selling it, like they want people to know what's happened, during those times. And it just is one of those things where obviously these are not offensive conditions to put in a book because it's history. And that's the whole thing with history repeating itself. I guess I'm wrong. but if we don't put this knowledge out and we ban books like this, it makes it a much worse place to live in if we ignore, aka like tearing down statues. As much as they may suck to see, I mean, it's kind of a reminder of what we shouldn't be. And this is my last point. I don't want to prolong your point because I want to hear for sure, because this book is just fucking juicy as shit. But there's a black comedian that I heard, David Lucas, and when he grew up in the town that he grew up in, there was there's a courthouse or something, and it still has a whites only section on it. They don't enforce it or nothing, but they keep the sign up. And when he was younger, he looked at it as cool because there was colored people only. So he was like, "Hey, a section just for black people," But later on, he says, "I think that's
a fun way of looking at it."
It is, right? And it's kind of an innocent way to look at it.
Yeah.
And they talk about like what you're born into, and if you're born into those conditions, you kind of make it up to your own. And what he said is that he's grateful that that's there where he's from, because his daughter can look at that and he can teach his daughter what used to be a thing back exactly where he lived. So I think the element of keeping history preserved is important. Maybe not have a statue of Robbie E. Lee in this platform in the middle of the park, but move it to a museum. But to get rid of it completely is to ignore history, which is far worse.
Yeah.
So that's my little spiel. All right. so well, my bad.
I mean, I just had a quick point to make. So this being a comic book, this is also just one volume of a 2-volume story. And just something that I realized reading this now that I'm older and whatnot, and I've read a million comics by this point.
Awesome.
But this is broken into 6 chapters. Most volumes in comics are broken up by 5 or 6 issues.
So they do follow the guideline of what a comic book is and stuff like that. And
so reading this, I could really, because the panel work throughout this, what I think was just really well done. Because it's such a weirdly formatted page, because it's not a traditional comic format.
What would you say makes it untraditional?
Well, if you were to grab an issue from my stack right there, even if you were to put it up to the size of it, it's not the same size.
Okay.
Mouse, the page is technically smaller.
Okay. So most comics, like the Avengers one you're holding up right now, are often that size, more longer, more like, how can I explain it? The visual show, but what we're comparing right now is Miles looks more like
it's
equally
more
shaped
square.
book. Yeah. And a comic book is more of a rectangle.
Yes.
Okay.
And so
longer by height and shorter by like width.
Yes. And so what I thought was just interesting about that, because that's something to take into consideration, because for me, who's make my own comics, I would have to print out different pages if I wanted to print it in this format, because when you draw on the pages, you draw on much bigger pages than when it gets printed down, because when it gets scanned and printed, it gets printed and scanned at a smaller scale.
Okay.
And so it was just really interesting because there's so many panels on one page, and he's technically working with less space.
Okay.
And so that's what kind of what I wanted to point out, because other comics might go by 6 panels, 9 panels. On some pages he has 10 panels, 12 panels, and I think it's really well done. The panel work is just incredible. It really flows too. You really feel every movement too. There's
even you opening that book right now, I'm just getting flashbacks to reading and how much, Jesus. I mean, just to like fall within what you're saying is that I think he does do a great job, because this book, I was reading it like like water. It was so fluid to me. You know, it was just, I know that makes no sense reading it like water, but what I'm trying to say is that it was just a continuation of, you know, like flip the page. Like all you heard, I was just reading it. All you heard was, you know, like I just kept going and going, and I didn't want to stop. And I read this book in one day, you know, and it's not a hard read to read in one day, but it's because of the structure that obviously helps. You know, this is a very, you may know more than me because you definitely do. But the structure of what you put out is super crucial. It is, and I'm a recipient from, you know, without knowing the structure importance, and that shit was amazing to read. You know, it was an enjoyment to read in that fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk more about it, but let's get into the band.
Yeah, first of all, that's fucking awesome you bring that up, because this is why it's awesome to have different skill sets and areas. You know, I make funny Putin jokes, but this information is super crucial, especially if you want to be a comic book creator, or if you're a comic book enthusiast, or you just like knowing random shit. You know, like I think it's super crucial that you point that shit out. So to me, that's genuinely fucking awesome, man.
Nice.
Essentially, I looked up one quick thing about, you know, Art Spiegelman, and he's talked on CNN about the ban of his book. So Tennessee,
CNN,
fuck, and it was like one of the most recent interviews he had on the book. There's much longer ones and stuff like that, but I think this Art Spiegelman guy is such a quirky character. There's a photo of him and in the ABC News article where he's signing books, he's signing posters. And he's being fed a sandwich by his assistant. And he's kind of, so his hands on the poster and he's biting the sandwich and his assistant is feeding him. It's so funny. But he has a lot to say and he's very cleverly spoken. Of course, he's a writer, you know, but he's very cleverly spoken. So the anchor for CNN, she says, because your novel is about the experience of your parents, your father, your mother, the legacy to your individual family about what the Holocaust wrought. And I wonder if a part of the reason they're being so myopic is because of a bigger problem, because so many people are seeing the Holocaust as what it was these days. And his response says, what would you say it is? I think it's a harbinger of things to come, you know? One of his responses to this idea of his book being banned, he says that he was baffled by the school board's decision and called the action Orwellian. You know, and so when he says Orwellian, he's referencing George Orwell. Yeah, who was he wrote Animal Farm, right? Mm-hmm. And Animal Farm talks about communism, no? Yeah. And to define the term Orwellian, it's an adjective describing a situation, idea, or societal condition that George Orwell identified as being destructive to the welfare of a free and open society. You know. And I swear to God, this is not me just doing this again. But again, going back to censorship. And last episode, we spoke about Seth Rogen's movie being censored, and now we're censoring Joe Rogan. You know, and where does this stop? You know, yeah. And I get it with the Joe Rogan and COVID, and I get it with North Korea threatening people. But when we're talking about the Holocaust, you know, and then we get to the core of why this book was banned. This book tells a lot of graphic things. And shows a lot of graphic things. But two of the reasons they banned this book was because they used the word damn, D-A-M-N. And mind you, all the characters in the book, of course you know, but this for the audience, they're mice, cats, and pigs. And one of the reasons they got rid of the book and banned it was because it showed nudity. Let me ask you this. Do mice wear clothes? You know? And we'll get into the context of what the nudity was later, because you know it skips over a lot we got to talk about. But I think those little things are crazy, and our Spiegelman also says, he says, I moved past total bafflement to trying to be tolerant to people who may possibly be Nazis. Talking about the people banning this book, you know, yeah, and those are strong words, of course, but it's pretty crazy, man. And so in January 10th, they removed Miles from its curriculum in Tennessee. And I'm not laughing about the band, first of all. I'm laughing. In 1972, Art wrote this to publish a story worth telling. So he didn't write this book with intent to like really tell the story of the Holocaust. He just really needed to write something that would be a good story, aka him asking his father what happened during the Holocaust. So that was kind of his purpose to write the book, and he never thought it would become what it would today, you know? And this is one quote that the anchor read to Art Spiegelman that Art Spiegelman has said in the past. Okay. He said, keep your nose in the book and keep people's noses out of which book you choose to stick your nose into. And yeah, so he recommends a book by Timothy Snyder. It's called Artillery, but I gotta correct that because I didn't write it out correctly. But he says it gives a real good perspective on a couple of things. So I think that's important. Supplementary. And I want to throw in also that for this book, Art Spiegelman won the Pulitzer Prize in 1992 for the work that tells the story of his Jewish parents living in the 1940s Poland and depicts him interviewing his father about his experiences as a Holocaust survivor. And yeah, man. So one of the last things I'll say about this is that another reason that they chose to ban the book, which isn't the major reason, because I don't think this can be justified as a major reason. I think it just shows the experience of the Holocaust. It says it shows people hanging. It shows them killing kids. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? It is not wise or healthy. School board member Tony Allman said about the book, which is part of the district's 8th grade English language arts curriculum. And might as well get rid of slavery at that point too, right? Might as well get rid of police brutality and things that are actually happening, you know? I mean,
man, what an asshole.
Yeah, what a piece of fucking shit. This dumbass Tony Allman. Yo, call that motherfucker and tell him how stupid he is. Because what we're going to teach? Sunshine and rainbows? That's literally not what this country's made up of. And I think it's just, I can't believe that we're allowing these dickheads to control what, or like at least advocate for what the kids should be, you know, learning about.
For the kids.
For the children. And so that's pretty much the overall gist of the ban. And again, I really wanted to dive more deep into the book because we can talk about the opinions of this dickhead all over, you know, and you know, but I think what's more important is when we get, and we will right now about what the essence of the book is, and it's really fucking crazy, man. It's really crazy.
I like to the whole ban thing. I think it's dumb.
Super.
I think it's pretty ridiculous. For the things that it's been banned for, such as nudity and whatnot. Like, you're really gonna ban a comic for nudity? Like another comic that also dealt with a controversy of nudity. I think I might have mentioned this to you at some point. This comic called Batman Damned. It was the first comic by DC's new label or new, what do they call it, imprint called Black Label.
Okay.
And Black Label was basically an imprint by DC where they could tell more mature stories, more serious stories, whatever the case is. Batman Damned was supposed to be the first one. And in the first book, you see Bruce coming back to the Batcave. He's all fucked up from a night of being Batman, whatever. He's taking off his suit and whatever.
God damn, my bad. I'm so sorry. Once again, Javi's done scared the shit out of me. I'm so fucking lost in Javi's words, and then Link comes up to me and scares me. Please continue that over again.
But anyways, Bruce is in the Batcave. He's taking off his bat suit. And he's all fucked up and whatever. And as he's walking through the shadows of the cave and whatever, you can see the outline of his dick.
Oh wow! What the hell?
And
like, I'm not upset or nothing. It's just I did not expect that. Okay.
And like, it's not explicitly drawn or anything like that. You just kind of see it in like.
All right, are you talking like Boge or like straight up as dick?
Like you see like the straight up like dick. Like it.
That's interesting. I don't know why they.
It's not fully drawn out because like it's like kind of lost in the shadows and whatever.
Okay.
So
lost in the shadow. Dick lost in the shadow. Just a funny sentence.
But there's a lot of controversy behind this because a lot of people were like, how could they ever put a dick in a Batman comic? And so there's a lot of controversy because Black Label is supposed to be an imprint for mature audiences. You have to be 17 or 18 or older to even purchase a Black Label comic.
I didn't know that, but I guess when you get like nowadays people don't do this at all, but if you were to buy like a Playboy magazine, I guess you can't sell it to a minor, right?
Yes. So
but I never knew a comic book could ever have such conditions. That's not hilarious. It's amazing. Actually.
I mean, technically comics have always, well, not always, but comics are like that. Like Fight Club 2, when that came out as a comic, I needed my mom's permission. I needed my mom to come to the comic book store for me to tell the guy like it's okay for me to get these because those are rated M.
Wow.
So comics like have their own like ratings and things like that. And so there's a lot of controversy because why are they going to put a Batman dick in a comic? But this is also, but this is also a comic where you need to be a certain age to even purchase it.
It's kind of like when people kind of say, oh, people are getting violent because of movies and video games. It's like, well, why are you letting your children play those games. You know, like you technically speaking, why are they able to get to those games? You should be in charge of what your children are. You know,
if you're so concerned about it,
exactly.
then like monitor it yourself.
And this is just because Trump is a dumbass. He dead ass blamed school shootings by white terrorists. Basically, that they did it because movies are too violent and games are too violent. I'm like, what is this? Fucking 1902? You know what I mean? Like, real year. But I couldn't believe the idiocracy of, I don't know, is that using that word right? Idiocracy?
Yeah.
Nice. It's just so stupid. And I wanted to point out this comment because, you know, ABC News has a cool little section on there where you can comment. America, right? and the first comment is is it the first or, the third comment by a person named Devan. And he says, I would bet that the parents who are against the books are all in favor of a book that advocates. Let me say it again. I'm sorry. I would bet that the parents who were against this book are all in favor of a book that advocates bashing of babies' brains out. You don't think so? Well, how is this? Psalm 137:9. The verse reads, quote, happy is the one who seizes your infants and bashes them against the rocks, unquote. So is it all right to kill infants in a quote unquote approved book, aka the Bible?
Yeah. That's
a very, very well said quote. And of course we have to check the Bible itself to make sure this person's not bullshitting. But the Bible is pretty crazy. And I was going to ask you, I was like, how old do you have to be to buy the Bible?
I don't think there's an age limit to buy the Bible.
Very interesting though. I'm not in the sense of like we should ban it, but I just think it's interesting because it does talk about a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Jesus.
But the controversy with that Batman comic, like what they ended up doing is that they stopped selling that comic and they reprinted it
without the bulge and everything.
without the outline and
That's
whatever.
Kind of pussy of them though. I wish they didn't do that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
And so I have a copy of the Batman dick. Don't worry. Signed by Brian Azzarello.
On the dick. No, but and this is not to be like that, but like freedom of speech, man. Freedom. You set the guidelines to what you're gonna put out, you know. And if some people are upset because they didn't do their research or allow their kids to get that book, that's their own damn fault, man. That's not nobody's fault except that. And it's a dick, bro. It's a fucking dick. Everybody has one. not everybody.
I mean, in general, there's such a strange sort of thing against nudity in entertainment. Yeah. We're okay with seeing violence. I remember seeing I remember seeing this online somewhere where it was like, we're okay with seeing violence in movies but not nudity. Yeah. And it was an example of a Danny Trejo movie where he guts some guy open, takes his guts, runs, like holds his intestine, runs down the hall and jumps out the window to use that guy's intestines as a rope to swing down. And
it's the same thing if he had a bunch of dicks in his hand and he's the dicks. No, I'm just kidding.
and then it was an example of like a shower scene where some lady's like having a shower and like they were like, both of these movies are rated R. And this movie with the nudity has no violence in it whatsoever.
It makes me think of it makes not think of anything but except that we as a society still look at sex as such taboo. And I think that's ultimately the core of it. And I mean, just people don't talk about sex enough, in my opinion. I think as a society and in general, I think sex is such a normal thing. And this is a way different conversation to have, about anything else. Well, when we talk about something that does involve that more so, but I've always felt like the standards of sex in Europe and everywhere and nudity are so much more loose.
Yeah.
And like in Europe, I'm trying to say, in other countries, because if America is just very, very just taboo about that, and it's ridiculous, bro. It's super ridiculous. And I think we need to just mature up as a nation, without sounding so like, patriotic.
Yeah, I mean, even in terms of the nudity in Mouse itself, to really start getting into the book, because I noted the point in nudity because it's during the moment where you see Art's past comic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and let's get into that as we start from the beginning because that gets into a crazy fucking scene.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quick because when I saw that, I was like, oh, there's a nudity.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is that I read this in middle school and I don't remember that.
And you know what? Fuck it. Like let's kind of bring it up because they do talk about it in the beginning of the book, but they don't really bring up what happened, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, what happened?
Well, Art's mother,
who also survived the Holocaust with the father of his father.
Yeah.
So his mom and his,
Yeah. She committed suicide at some point.
Yeah, and she slashed her wrist in a bathtub.
Yeah.
And we'll get into more of how that happened. Mind you, this is a comic book that has the characters represented as animals, talking about the Holocaust. And I wanted to bring it up because Art Spiegelman said, if you're reading this book and you're getting off or like being offended by that scene when she's literally killing herself in a bathtub and bleeding to death, and what you notice first is the nudity, it's like, there's probably a problem with you, you know? Like if that's your biggest takeaway from that whole scene where, you know, it's such an intense scene, and if what you're taking away is nudity, what, man? Like there's a much bigger issue there, you know? So I think that was an interesting thing and very harsh off the bat, man. I said off the bat, man. It's pretty funny. We'll definitely start getting into that. The one thing I want to say is that when I finished reading this book, I actually, for the first time, had my mood change really badly.
Oh wow!
Man, I read this book and I went home, and immediately I noticed that I was in a negative mood. Like I was annoyed very quickly. I was like, I felt depressed, bro. Like I read this shit and I was not happy, man. Like I say I hate this book, but I love it because it makes me feel something, you know. It's hilarious to say, but I never had that happen to me with the book. You know, like I felt feelings of sorrow and emotion, all the things that I read before and stuff like that. But I genuinely like felt disgusting and I hated a lot of things after I read this book because we have it so easy nowadays, you know, and not everybody has it easy nowadays, but Jesus Christ, man. So I have some notes for the book and everything. And essentially, the story begins with the father, you know, and they're in a town called Częstochowa. You know, first of all, to my Polish listeners, przepraszam, czy mogę z tobą rozmawiać. Just want to say that real quick. So, you know, przepraszam. Okruszki wszędzie, chleb, you know. All I said was, excuse me, can I ask you a question? There's crumbs everywhere, bread.
Nice.
Yeah, so if you know, essentially, the father, who I thought his name was Ulek, but his name is like
Vladek.
Yeah, so I don't know why I put Ulek. I'm a dickhead. But he gets married to the mom in 1936. They marry on February 14th, 1937. And this is the mom of Artie, Anja. That's her name. Mm-hmm. And with Vladek, right? Vladek is the father's name. So ultimately, the story comes off him telling the story of how he met his wife and how the Holocaust came about. And so, again, the son's name is Artie, the dad's name is Vladek, and the mom's name was Anja. Right? Mm-hmm. And so I just want to start off with there. I mean, it's hard to see on the visuals right here, but right now you see a couple of signs where they have a banner going over the town that says, "This town is Jew-free." And they would make Jewish people hold up signs that said, "I am a filthy Jew."
Yeah.
You know? And off the bat, this is in the beginning of the book. And there were synagogues that were burned down, Jews beaten with no reason, and the whole town pushing out all Jews. And it was just terrible. And in August 24th, 1939, there was a draft notice from the Polish Reserves Army. And Vladek, Artie's father, had to go to the draft.
You know, I thought it was crazy how learning about how his Vladek's father was so afraid of war that he would starve his children.
I think that's a very incredible point you bring up, and he would literally starve his children, make them seem unhealthy,
so that they couldn't be enlisted to go to war.
And with Vladek, the father, he followed all those guidelines and eventually was like, fuck that, I don't want to be starved no more. I ended up going to war. And when he did, they trained them for a few days. And remember, they got drafted on August 24th. They trained for a few days and they were put on the front lines in September.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy, bro. Can you imagine fighting for a war and you only train a couple of days? Fuck that, man. And
that's a real crash course right there.
And with Vladek's father, he was in the Russian army. And this is the reason he didn't want his son to go to the army, because in Russia, when you join the army, you have to stay in the army for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
You were stationed in Siberia. And in order to avoid being in the army, he had to pull out 14 of his teeth, because the standard to get relief from the army is missing 12 teeth.
Yeah, I remember reading that. I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, so after Vladek's father experienced that, he's like, I don't want none of my children to go to the army. and that didn't work for Vladek because he had to go to the fucking army. So my bad. What I'm trying to say is that earlier I said Vladek went to the army, but Vladek's father went to the army in 1939. And so yeah, man. So eventually, now that Vladek got drafted into the war, you know, he basically kills a Nazi while he's fighting for the war, and they get taken in as prisoners of war. I don't know if you remember. If you remember, I'm talking about where Vladek is fighting, and he shoots at the opposing soldier,
and he thinks it's like a moving tree.
Yeah, and eventually, like, they get taken in. His people, like his fellow soldiers, they get overrun and overtaken, and they get taken in as prisoners of war, and they get sent to POWs. You know? And so, when they were there, they were staying in the tents and everything. They would be put into tents. They would just be held captive, and it was freezing cold. They had no warmth. They had no nothing. They had to. I mean, Vladek, Artie's father, he like took showers and stuff because a lot of people would get frostbite wounds, and the wounds there was pus, and in the pus there was lice. Yeah. Disgusting. So people thought he was crazy for taking showers in this freezing cold, but he knew because he's such a clean freak. Which is interesting to his character, having survived the Holocaust. You know,
he's very neurotic.
Yeah, exactly. And so the fact that he would do that, I guess he was just very smart to do that. And after the war prisoners were there for a bit, the Germans started putting up signs, and the signs would say exactly this. It says, "Workers needed. War prisoners may volunteer for labor assignments to replace German workers. Call to the front housing. Abundant food will be supplied. No, housing and abundant food will be supplied." And all the other soldiers thought it was a trick. And Vladek said, fuck that. I'm not staying here and doing all this shit. So I'm going to go join and work, you know? When they were working, they were literally forced to move mountains. And it's hard to see on the visual right there, but they basically had to level out the mountain.
Yeah.
Fucking crazy, bro. Fucking crazy. Imagine being able to do that. And if you were to give
When
up,
I first read it, I thought he was just like being hyperbolic.
Facts, but they literally had to do that shit, man. And just being a prisoner of war, Vladek was having a terrible, terrible fucking time. As who wouldn't? You know? And this is a really, and to go into the visuals of everything, Vladek has a dream, and you see how right here his grandmother is depicted. It's amazing how she's drawn, because there's age within how she's drawn, and she's dead, but she came to him in a dream and says, "You're gonna be free." He says, "You will come out of this place free." She says, "You will come out of this place free on the day of Parshas Truma." And Parshas Truma is essentially each week on Saturday, they read a section from the Torah. And this is so-called Parsha. And 1 week each year, it's Parsha Truma. So that's a little complicated, but that comes down to the Jewish faith. And I don't know if you know what the fuck I'm talking about, Jews. You know? And this is just me going like with the storyline and stuff like that. So button whenever you want, because I'm just kind of going with whatever. Because I just wrote down the notes as I took it in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say because so he starts working and he finds out that it's really tough work, and he's finding out that people are just kind of what happens after that? He finds out that people are being able to leave. And he gets lined up, and he's able to finally leave, it seems like. And he gets put on the train to seem like he can finally go back home. Back
home to his town. And this happened right after he got the dream of his grandmother saying that you will be free. And and
he's on the train, but the train does not stop at home for him. It keeps going. And he's like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, what the fuck is going on? and this time, Poland, where they are, it was split into two different sections. The Protectorate and the Reich. And basically the Reich was annexed to Germany. There's that word again, annex, Crimea. Yeah. And the Protectorate, it was German controlled government. So, I mean, that's just interesting to look at, because where he was going was Sosnowiec, right? Which at that time was a Reich, which is annexed to Germany. And so that's where he was going, but they did not end up going there at all. Like you said, he thought he was going back to his town, but that train just kept on going to a Protectorate, which is a German-controlled government. He went to Lublin instead.
Yeah, and from there, he was able to kind of make way, finally getting back home. And when he finally does get back home, he visits his parents first, which I thought was a pretty good little like move to make. Yeah. And he finally goes back home. He's reunited with Anja and their son Richu, however you pronounce it. And because that's another sad thing that we haven't really pointed out is that they also had a son that they lost in the Holocaust. Yeah. And that's such a weird thing to think about. I couldn't imagine like having a sibling that I never knew that was lost in a war years ago. And
in general, like just people nowadays with, people like lost, brothers and sisters. I mean, there's terrible reasons for that to happen, but in general, it's just a sad occurrence, man.
It really is.
And I
mean, so he finally gets back home, and what's great about this comic too is that it does a great job of sort of breaking up the story of not just only telling you what happens during the Holocaust. It stops every now and then to come back to present day and show Art and his father, and the relationship between them is so interesting to me. It just is so reminiscent of my relationship with my dad, of just like, you're so difficult, but oh my God. Like,
and it makes it more intimate, the story, because it's much more than being like, okay, Jewish, Holocaust, gas chambers, as you all know. It's like, no, this is one person within a bunch of people that this happened to. And to me, I think that's what also made me so depressed about it, is that you get to learn more about these characters that, and what they'll say a lot is to the gas they went, to the gas. And I don't know who he's talking to here. I don't know if it's his father or not, but they're talking about how they took a bunch of, the Nazis took a bunch of Jewish people, and they marched them to the forest, and they shot and killed 600 Jews.
And that they used to do that regularly.
Yeah, man. And 100%, it's just a sad thing. It's just a sad thing. And he eventually, Vladek, when he was in Lublin, which is, the German-controlled government area, he left and snuck back to Sosniak, which is where his family was. And the way he did it was he pretended to be Polish. He went onto the Polish. He went onto the train, right? And the train was split up by two different sections. It was basically the Nazis and then the Jewish and the Polish people, right? What he would do is go onto the Nazi train, and he would pretend to be Polish, which a lot of Jewish people did. What I thought was very clever about this book is that when they did that, and when a Jewish person pretended to be Polish, the way they were represented in the comic book is that they would have
wearing the mask,
a pig mask.
Yeah,
where it was very clearly obvious that they had strings attached to the back of their heads, and it's like if I were to wear like a monkey mask and put on a monkey for Halloween, like that's how. And then it's awesome they did that, because it goes to show like they're obviously Jewish, aka mice, in this book, but to pretend they had to be Polish, which is interesting because it's just like. This is interesting, but like J. Cole has a very famous line where he says like hate is basically hate, and he's like, I know what the Germans did to the Jews, and what he's trying to say is basically like Germans and Jews look the same, not incredibly because there's different facial features and stuff like that, but complexion, they're both white, and it's like hate can arise anywhere. Of course, it happens between like to black people from white people, especially racist white people and white supremacists. But it's like hate can come from anywhere. Like when he says, "I know what the Germans did to the Jews," and I think that's a really incredible line. He says, "I wish I had the context in particular, supplementary and stuff like that."
Yeah.
But when he goes to his town, Vladek's mom had cancer, and recently they had beaten Jews in the streets, and they were forced to sing prayers while they were beaten. He was actually, this is sad as fuck, but he said that his mom had passed from, her cancer, but thankfully she didn't have to endure all the cruelty from the Holocaust.
Yeah, she technically missed it, and that's crazy.
And in that time with the Nazis, and mind you, this is still before Auschwitz and everything. Like this is the upcoming involvement of what's soon to be. This is not even the bad part yet. And in the town, it was a rule that at 7:00, all Jews had to be in their house with the lights turned off. And all the Jewish businesses had to be taken over by Aryan managers. So with the son that they had, to, basically make sure his son survives, they wanted to basically say, hey, let's give our son to other people so other people can take care of them. And in this scene right here, you see Anja with her eyes very open and darkened around. And she says, I'll never give up my baby. Never.
Yeah.
Because she said she'd rather be with her family than give up her baby.
And he mentions that the kid that did go survived the Holocaust, and it's a really just kind of sad point where it's like, man, if they really did give up Richu in that moment, he probably would have survived.
Yeah, man. Right here, I just had this little part that I screenshotted, because I screenshotted the parts that I thought were more interesting. And this is poster hanging up in the background. No attention was brought to it in terms of reading the story, but if you're just looking at the panels, and in the poster it reads, "Reward: for every unregistered Jew you find, you get 1 kilo of sugar."
I saw that.
Fucking crazy, bro. Fucking crazy. So essentially, I mean, the family that Andre was part of was super rich.
Yeah.
And at this point now they had 12 people living in a 2.5 small room.
There's another point to the panel work I gotta say with this is that in the scene where they're all having the dinner again and Art is back, or Vladek is back. If you see in the panels, you see that one of the children is like spilling his food or something on the table, and then in the next panel, like the mom or whatever kind of like slaps his hand or something like that, and he kind of slams the plate and he starts like crying or something like that. And the next panel, like the mom starts holding him, and that's it. And there's no speech bubbles. There's no dialogue for those characters. The story, it's just happening in the panels during the dialogue. And I remember
that's pretty good attention to detail you have right there. Actually, that's
awesome. I caught that, and I was just like, wow, like, like what a funny little thing where it's just like the attention to detail is so great,
and it adds to the personality of the characters.
It does. It really does. But it seems like things are kind of okay for the time being. Everyone's together again.
Yeah. And it's a huge, again, 12 family members. And this is the part that really like tore my fucking heart up, man. They get a notice in the mail, right? And the notice, it says, all Jews over 70 years old will be transferred to Thierenstadt in Czechoslovakia on May 10th, 1942. What they advertised this area to be is a community better prepared to take care of the elderly than ours in Sosniak, which is where they are right now. And they said, that sounds like a trick.
Yeah.
And so they hid their grandparents. So a family of 12, they hid the grandparents. And the police came and they said, hey, where's the grandparents? We never got them. We never put them into the list of people in the community. And they were like, oh, no, they went, even though they were hiding them. So then the police leave and then they come back. And they come back and they take the father of Anja, and they said, if you don't bring the grandparents out, we're gonna take each and every one of you to what essentially was Auschwitz. They sent a letter and said if the grandparents weren't sent, they would take the whole family. And so the family, they sent their grandparents, and they got killed in the gas chambers. And the saddest part was that they told the grandparents that they would be going to somewhere else that was actually safe. Like, they didn't say that they were going to go to the community. They said that they would lie to the grandparents so they wouldn't have to be in fear. And it just broke my fucking heart to think about them arriving at Auschwitz and having to endure, like, dying at such an old age, at 70 plus years old, man. Like, having to live that long just to get murdered, man.
Especially then. That's a long life, especially then. 70 years.
I didn't think about that, man. Fuck, man. That even now talking about that. So then there's an announcement made, and they say to the town of Sosniak, fellow Jews, and mind you, there was Nazi soldiers that were controlling where the Jews were and keeping track of them, but there was also Jewish people that were doing the work of Nazi soldiers, which is harboring the Jews and making sure that basically the enemy making you work for them. And that's crazy as fuck. Like, having Jews control how Jews will be killed, it's fucking crazy. So they make an announcement and they say, fellow Jews, on Wednesday, August 12th, every one of you, young and old, male and female, healthy and sick, must register at the Dienst Stadium. Saying basically everybody in the town has to register. And basically he says there's no cause for alarm. It's only a matter of inspecting your documents and stamping them. This will protect you as citizens of the region. And everybody's like, this is going to be a trap. I'm not going. Everybody was just worried. And so about 25 to 30,000 Jews from Sosniak went to the stadium. And essentially old people, families with lots of kids, and people without work cards are all going to be to the left. And the people that didn't get stamped will go to the right side. And what this essentially was was if your passport got stamped, you were good to go, and if you wasn't stamped, you got sent to Auschwitz, and you were killed. And it's just fucking sad as shit, man.
And it's just based on age, and it's just kind of like, that's it. You're too old, so you gotta go.
And one of the saddest parts is that there was a couple. This is fucking sad, man. The husband was allowed to pass by, and because his daughter had too many kids. His daughter had too many kids, so she had to go to the other side, which is the Auschwitz side. And so what the dad did, he climbed over to the bad side, and they both got killed with the kids.
Yeah,
bro. Right here, I have in the stadium of approximately 10,000 people that stayed, whose papers weren't stamped. So basically, the ones that were going to be sent to Auschwitz. The stadium was so crowded that people even suffocated. There was no food, and there was no toilets, and some people even jumped out the windows to end their misery early. And at this point, Artie goes and searches for Andre's diaries, which we're getting to the point now where, like, she committed suicide a little bit, and he sees that within the collection of his father, he has things like calendars from 1965, and apparently he's a big hoarder, right?
Yeah.
And that his current wife says that he doesn't throw anything away. Like he even has a plastic picture from the hospital. And what I pointed out when I was reading it is that he doesn't throw anything away. But earlier in the book, when Artie came to go visit him, because there's multiple trips he takes. This story wasn't told in one sitting. Like it's multiple days of the day. They go back and forth from the story of the Holocaust to just current times of Artie talking to his father and asking him, okay, let's pick up where we left off. And earlier when Artie came, he was wearing a coat that had a hole in it. And so the father, Vladek.
Did it even have a hole in it? I don't remember it having a hole in it.
Something it was, but he threw out his coat.
I think he just said it was too old or something.
Yeah, like, why are you wearing this old coat? You should have a nice new coat. And so he threw out his coat out. And I was like, wait, why did he throw his coat off? It was old, but then he hoards everything and still has calendars from 1965, Like, why does he keep everything and hoard everything that he has, but wants his son to have much better, And
that is interesting.
And I thought to myself, I was like, maybe it's that he wanted better for his son, but always disciplined himself in a manner that was imprinted with him, though. The harshness he dealt with to keep everything, because at one point he was losing everything. So basically for him, you kind of taint your brain to saying, like, you don't ever want to lose what you have. So let's just keep everything we have right now. But for some reason, he didn't want that for his son.
Yeah.
So that was super interesting to me. And then we get, you can get to this point where basically the comic book that Artie wrote was called Prisoner on the Hell Planet, which is Artie talking about his mother.
Yeah, and I thought this was really cool just because it's a comic within a comic. Because
super dope. They even have a picture right here of me holding it the same way he's holding it, because it's so cool.
But because what's interesting about the comic in general is that whenever the comic is pretty meta, because whenever it's in present day, they're very explicit of like, I'm writing this book that you're holding right now. I'm writing it right now.
Yeah, man.
And so to get this meta where this is a comic that Art Spiegelman created, and it's even copyrighted at the end of it on the bottom. Yeah, you can see his copyright on the bottom where it has his name at the end of the comic.
Oh wow. And first of all, can I just say the artwork within the comic, it's trippy and terrifying and sad. And one of my one of the things that I think is the most saddest is that he's crying and being upset, and in the background his mother has just died. And it says, and for $950, we have a bronze casket with the bronze colored velvet. Of course, for $2,000, we can, talking about the casket she'd be buried in. Man, I personally just think that caskets should be free. I think government should pay for funerals.
Okay.
Because why the fuck, Oh, and this is the scene. I swear to God, man, when I was reading this, I did not notice that she was naked.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I swear. And I'm not just trying to say this to be like, but oh my God, I even just seen this now. Right now, if you're watching the visual, you can see on the screen that there's a dead body in the bathtub. But if you're not, there's a dead body in the bathtub, and it's his mother who had just slashed her wrist. Before this, she always dealt with anxiety and issues with her weight, and she was taking pills and stuff like that. They talk about this earlier in the thing. But right now, right before she killed herself, she went up to Artie And she went up to his room and she told Artie, "Hey, you still love me, right?" And Artie's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever, you know." And that was the last time he ever saw his mom, like, alive. And in this page right here, you see the mom dead on the top screen. And it says right there, "But for the most part," Artie speaking, "I was left alone with my thoughts." It goes from her mom in the bathtub, dead, with blood surrounding her body, to it saying menopausal depression, to showing a pile of bodies. And then it says Hitler did it. And then it says mommy. And then it says bitch. And then it shows her slashing her wrist with, on the right arm is her holding the razor with the numbers imprinted on her from the Holocaust, and then slitting her wrist, and then him and her laying down in the bed together, the child. And then at the right corner to end it off is him just holding his head, wearing the striped pajamas, basically, as people know it as, from the Holocaust. That scene and this whole little area is such a draining. Like, for me, it drains me right now because I think of my mother and just, you know, I would never ever want somebody to go to this. And unfortunately, that's just one situation.
Yeah, I mean, because to even talk about this comic is like talking about a whole other comic in itself.
Yeah,
because just the fact that he dresses himself in the striped pajamas like that, and it's called Prisoner on the Hell Planet.
Yeah. It's
very much this idea that he's living in hell, like in a living hell.
Yeah,
that he feels like, because there was in one of the descriptions of the book that speaks to the relationship between Art and his father, they say that this tale is about survivors and the survivor of survivors,
which is still a huge thing because they have to endure that. It's like PTSD. It's the ultimate PTSD.
And so here's Art almost dressing himself as if he is a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
But he's not. He's a survivor of a Holocaust survivor.
Which is, you know, it gets passed down. And even not to like be like that, but like, you know, genetically speaking, you can pass down depression. You can pass down these, you know, symptoms of being, you know, what you have. You don't just pass down physical attributes. You pass down mental attributes. It's a very true thing. And and in the comic book that he wrote within the comic book, he says, well, after she killed herself, he writes, as he shows himself in a prison behind bars wearing the outfit, he says, congratulations to his mother. You've committed the perfect crime. You put me here. Shorted all my circuits, cut my nerve endings, and crossed my wires. You murdered me, mommy, and you left me here to take the rap. And then the other guy in the prison cell with them says, pipe down, Max. Some of us are trying to get some sleep. And it just shows that I'm sure he's not mad at his mother, but the way the way that she killed herself traumatized this kid forever.
Yeah, I mean, especially she left no note.
No note too.
So they're just kind of left to wonder why she ever did this, especially during a time when mental illness wasn't.
Nobody really paid attention to it.
Yeah, so they were really just left to wonder why she would ever do something like this, and it's really sad.
Yeah, and essentially the reason this book is brought up is because the comic book within the comic book that Artie wrote is that his father finds the comic book that Artie wrote about the mother killing himself, his wife, his late wife, and he gets really upset that he found it because it just disturbed him. Him finding that comic book.
Well, he never says explicitly that he's upset by that. He
kind of shows signs of it.
He shows signs of it, and Mala, his new wife, is kind of like, "Oh, I think he's upset because of this." But when the comic does get brought up, he does kind of say like, "Oh yeah, like I read it," and he says, "Yes, I found it when I looked for the things you asked me last time. I saw the picture there of mom, so I read it and I cried."
Yeah.
And Art says, "I'm sorry," and Vladek responds, "It's good you got it. It's good you got it outside of your system, but for me, it brought in my mind so much memories of Anja."
I can imagine, man.
And that's all he kind of really says to it. He doesn't really say anything positive or negative about it. He's just kind of like, "Yeah, I read it and I cried."
And he shows so much strength for somebody that dealt with so much. But in the comic book that Artie wrote, it shows that when they found out that happened, they held each other and they fell asleep together on the floor, holding each other and crying.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that you're kind of ego deaf at that point. You know what I mean? So you experience something like that.
Ego deaf?
Isn't that a thing? Like I know that has to do more like tripping and stuff like that. And like,
I have no idea what you're saying.
I'll tell you right now. Because it's a definition that I think is like you go so stale. So Ego Death is a name of an album by the internet, but it's a complete
By the internet?
it's a group. It's a hip hop group.
Okay.
But ego death is a complete loss of subjective self identity. The term is used in various intertwined contexts with related meanings. In Jungian psychology, the synonymous term psychic death is used, which refers to a fundamental transformation of the psyche. So basically, in death and rebirth mythology, ego death is a phrase of self-surrender and transition. So it may not be ultimately what I'm trying to refer it as, but it's kind of like this blankness that you go into where it's like, you ever see a scene in a movie where something crazy happens that they kind of just stare off and all you hear is beep, like everything just kind of goes away. Like that's what I'm trying to refer to as, you know. And so I imagine that once you deal with that, you go stale and you don't ever, you only feel that in your memory, but it's so hard for something. Because he loved that woman.
Yeah.
Like he loved that woman.
He still does.
Yeah. And this scene is crazy because after they talk about the comic book, in 1943, there was an order that stated all Jews in Sodniak must now go live in Shradula, an old village. And once they go there, all the Jews would have to cover the cost of the Polish who would move into the Jews' former houses in Sosniak. Essentially, what they're told to do is go live somewhere else. And the houses that you used to own, you have to pay for other people to move in there because you won't be living there no more.
Yeah, they got moved into the ghettos.
Yeah, they got moved to the ghettos. And this was also another scene that fucking killed me that I'm going to show the camera right now. But in the spring of that year, 1,000 Jews were taken to Auschwitz, mostly kids of 2 to 3 years old. When the kids were taken away, they would scream. And they would scream so loud that what the guards would do is that they would grab the kids and they would slam them into the wall. They're here. And you want to show the camera real quick? They would grab the kids by the legs and they would slam the kids into the wall. And once all the kids saw that, they stopped screaming. And then they were just taken to Auschwitz and killed. Or experimented on, or, you know, gets deeper than that with Hitler.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, it was one of the more like intimate details about it is that one of the Tasha, who was given the children, I think right chick, right, or something like that, or Tasha, basically Vladek and Anja's son was with her, right, and 2 other kids. And when she found out all this was happening, instead of letting them go and get killed and her get killed herself, what she always did is she carried a poison around her neck, and she basically had the children take it in as she did, so that they wouldn't have to end their lives in Auschwitz. Rather than instead, it would be within their own terms.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ, bro,
it's fucking tough, man.
Mind you, this is the truth, man. This is not just some made. It would be. I wish this was a made up story. You know, that's the sad part about it. You know,
I reading this, a part of me almost thought like I can't believe that this hasn't been adapted into like a TV show or a movie or anything. But then I'm like, how would you even do that?
Yeah.
Like, is this adaptable, or can this comic or can this story only exist in comic form?
Yeah.
And
within this like context, right, with the mice and the pigs and the cats, I think they did perfect. He did a perfect job with that.
So I feel like the only way they could ever do it is if they did like an animated movie or something.
Yeah, and they would have to kill that shit to give respects to his vision. I think so.
Yeah, I hope
they do.
Yeah, because reading a lot of this stuff, it really takes you back, and you're kind of like, wow, I can't believe this happened.
Yeah, man.
Like this actually happened.
Yeah, that's the crazy part about it, man. It's not made up. It's not fiction. It's truly one of the most disgusting things that could ever happen in this world. And at this point, Vladek began to hide because not everybody's being taken away. It didn't matter if you had papers. It didn't matter about anything. You were just being grabbed and deported. And at the end of that year in July, 10,000 Jews were taken in 1 week. I wrote a little quick note. I wrote, humans are the most adaptable creatures on Earth. And essentially within the ghettos, only about 1,000 Jews were left. Everybody basically started to just had to hide. And one of the things that Vladek said to Anja, who just wanted to die at that point, he says, and this is Anja, the one who stood at risk. Vladek says this to her: "No, darling, to die, it's easy, but you have to struggle for life. Until the last moment, we must struggle together. I need you." And that's what made me think that, this was after finding out their child was dead and hearing that Vladek's nephew wasn't going to hide from the Nazis. So as soon as she found out her son was dead, she wanted to kill herself. She wants everything to end. And that's when he said that to her. And when he said, I need you, I can imagine that when she committed suicide after having survived the Holocaust, that he was truly alone in this world.
Yeah, I mean, because something I kind of wanted to bring up is like the fact that he even remarried. Because he says at some point, why did I ever do that?
Yeah, I wondered about that. I don't know why he would do that.
And yeah, they never really explain anything of like why they got married or anything. They just say he got remarried.
Yeah.
And because like I said before, he clearly still loves Anja to
the
this day.
fullest. To the
and
fullest.
so it really makes me question why he would ever remarry.
There's one thing that she says where she's like, sometimes I think he remarried me just because
I'm like the same size
as Anja.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's fucking like what is it? Psychologically just freaking.
Yeah.
Look at that. Like just because it just reminds him of her, but you'll never get her back. And this is not one of those things where like she like chose to leave. Like she literally is gone from the face of the earth forever. Jesus Christ, bro. That shit is heavy, man.
It is.
I remember I actually reading this comic book. I texted you. I'm like, this comic book is fucked. and that was me. My whole happiness just going away. And then we get towards the end of the book, essentially. And I mean, in 1944, Vladek and Anja, they left the ghetto and headed towards Sosny again. And they had somebody to take them in and hide them. And I think I read what I read right here. Essentially, they were gonna go to Hungary. They were gonna have somebody sneak them into Hungary, and Anja's like, I don't want to go. Like I don't want to go. It's not gonna work out. And Vladek's like, it's gonna work out. Trust me, it's gonna work out. And at the end of Mounds 1, Anja and Vladek end up at concentration camps because it was unsuccessful. I think they were paid off to do that, right? They got tricked into...
Yeah, because they mentioned that the guys are no longer on the train as soon as the Gestapo comes in.
So at this point, everybody was being pretty much grimy and just tricking anybody else for any money. And they told them they will get them into Hungary, but they ended up just tricking them. And so at the end, they both end up in concentration camps. They were in fear of their lives. And the more interesting thing is that Artie... He's like, well, I have to find my mom's journals on this because the ones she wrote during the events got destroyed. So she wrote some in post. And he says, I need those books for the perspective of her experience in the concentration camps. And then Vladek tells his son that he has burned those books because it pained him to see Anja's writing about the Holocaust surviving. I mean, the Holocaust and everything.
Yeah.
And Artie gets upset.
He gets really upset,
man. And the one thing that Anja wrote in the book was, I hope my son sees and is interested in reading these entries. And then Artie calls his father a murderer.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, to back up real quick, the panel of when they reach Auschwitz is just such a harrowing panel.
Yeah.
It takes up so much of the page, and this is just another like thing to sort of explain of that there's such thing as panel composition.
What page is this, by the way?
This is page 157.
Okay.
And there's such thing as panel composition, where how you organize the panels matters a lot.
Yeah.
And the size of a panel matters a lot.
This is one of the few pages that have basically half the page taken up to show.
This is one of the very few pages. The another notable scene I thought that was similar to this is when Vladek points out the first time he sees the swastika.
Yeah.
And it's another six size like panel where it just shows like the flag and whatever. And I thought that was another powerful moment where it takes up so much of the page and it really puts it on display and it says, this is
in
it.
1938 in Czechoslovakia, Vladek saw his first swastika.
It's heavy.
Yeah, man.
This whole story is just so amazing because just even the present day stuff is just so enticing. You want to just like know everything. And when you find out that Anja's diaries have been burned, immediately I was like, so this is why he didn't want to look for him, because he was very hesitant after looking for them, quote unquote. And Art is like pushing, he's like, no, come on, let's look for it. And Vladek's like, no, they're gone. I don't know where they are. And then he confesses. It's like, actually, I burned them. And I couldn't imagine my reaction if I were Art in that.
Well, I'd be furious, but it's also like, it makes sense, man. Like those are horrible words to be written down.
Yeah, I mean,
and we may be interested, but he wouldn't want to read those again.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag because it's such an awful thing that happened, but it's understandable why he would do such a thing. And I just think it's such a strong way to end it with Art just walking away like all pissed off and he's just like murderer.
And this is just the first book, first volume, right?
Yeah.
Motherfucker, this shit was one of the most harshest literature I've ever read in my whole life. I'm sorry. It's fucking crazy, man. And I know this there are like in concentration camps happening. This I may be wrong with, we'll put it in, but with fucking, what is it, in China with people that are Muslim and stuff like that. I need to really specify what I'm talking about because I don't want to be really, incorrect. But things like this are still happening today, They might not resemble it word for word and exactly. And it's just crazy. This I heard today, but I would need more context. When they were charged for crimes, Germany and stuff like that, Germany, when they fell and everything, when Hitler died, they basically got rid of so much evidence that they weren't able to be charged for a lot of the crimes and torture things that they did. They were just kind of charged for, the war they caused. And that's what I was talking about with the Nuremberg trials. That's what occurred in those times and stuff like that. And this is just me like hearing a couple of things off what happened with Germany and to get more involved with the real history aspects. But it's also why I bring up the Ukraine and Russia thing, because this may not be what's going to happen in Russia and Ukraine. And I really hope nothing happens. But I mean, that's what happened with the motive that Hitler had, to persuade the whole, following of people to do terrible things than somebody else just because they were born a certain way and follow a certain way of life. It's fucking crazy, bro.
Man,
I wanted to throw this in there real quick. If you're listening still, which I really hope you are, Google Japan Secret Unit 731.
Japan Secret Unit 731.
Look it up. I'm gonna look it up when I can ASAP because I hear some crazy shit. I was telling you earlier about it, and I'm gonna keep you on the tip of your toes so you can hear about that shit. But this to get back to the book, this is. It is one of the most amazing books I've ever read in my whole life.
Nice.
I really think so. And my hat off to Art Spiegelman, because that motherfucker, it must have taken him a lot to write these things too. And he actually grew up he was around Rego Park, New York.
Yeah.
Which is important. I know you motherfuckers are from Rego Park. So.
No, I thought this was just such an amazing tale from beginning to end. Yeah. There was one time where something happened on the news, and my brother was like, "Oh, did you hear what happened on the news?" And I didn't know. I asked him what happened. He told me, and I was like, "No, I didn't hear that story."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Story? This isn't a story. This actually happened."
Oh shit!
And I was like, "No, I know, I believe you, but that's what people refer to news sometimes, as the news story."
That's a good little thing. He was like, wait, I kind of see what he's trying to say,
Yeah.
But I know what you're trying to say, of course, too.
Yeah. And so it's just because this book is very informational.
Yeah.
It's very educational.
Yeah.
It teaches you a lot about what happened.
Yeah.
And the fact that this got banned from a fucking from Tennessee, god damn it. I don't ever want to go to Tennessee. God damn. Another comic, I know I mentioned this to you before, another comic that got banned, Y the Last Man. Why would you do that?
Nah, man. I think what this comic book does really well is it speaks a message kind of subliminally. Kind of like if you look on the back of the book, which we'll show right here, but we'll add this video so you can see what we're looking at. But like that for now. But you see how Artie is laying on the ground, kind of like a kid looking up at his father just tell a story. I mean, that's how I felt reading this book. Like I'm just listening to this old guy just tell me a story, and a really intense story. And again, it goes back to, I think there's something that says right here, man, that this is not a comic book. This is a series of just real harsh things. And how can I say, man? I wanted to show you something with the second book, because the second book has a quote that talks about Mickey Mouse, and comparing it because the Jews are mice in the book, and saying Mickey Mouse is this and that, but I don't want to misquote it. So I'll just read this quote at the end of it. Mouse is a book that cannot be put down, truly, even to sleep. When two of the mice speak of love, you are moved. When they suffer, you weep. Slowly through this little tale, comprised of suffering, humor, and life's daily trials, you are captivated by the language of an old Eastern European family and drawn into the gentle and mesmerizing rhythm. And when you finish Mouse, you are unhappy to have left that magical world and long for the sequel that will return you to it. And even this imagery right here, man, of fucking like all these, you know,
Yeah.
like that shit is just spooky as shit, you know. And I'm just so grateful they banned that book because I got to read it. I saw a lot of people were saying and commenting and stuff when it comes to the post. They were like, I was like, now more than ever, I want to read this book. And
isn't that such an interesting phenomenon?
We just love.
You tell me I can't read this.
I want that shit.
Well, I want it.
and best believe I'm taking a whole day when I can, when I get a little day off, and I'm reading that book, the second book, immediately, bro. Because
You're gonna have to borrow that off of you,
bro. Of course, and I gotta borrow that Court of Owls. So trade for trade, motherfucker. I do want to say also, and you know, coming to an end. I did. The funny thing about this is that I read the Seth Rogen book that I mentioned, right? And I'm starting to read a lot more. That's why it's pretty fucking cool. This has a lot to do with it. And I read a yearbook, and he talks about how being Jewish is something that it really is within you, and it's not. It's kind of more than a religion, right? He's like it's the only religion where you kind of always are it, you know. You're Jewish, right? It's the only one that ends with the ish at the end, right? So, like, I'm quirky-ish, you know, I'm Jewish. You have to always be it regardless. I'm paraphrasing terribly. But he says, like, say they chop off your finger and you find it in the woods. I think I said this before. They can trace back that you're Jewish through that chopped little piece of finger, you know, because you're born being a Jew, because it's about race, you know? And I think that was a really interesting way he puts it. And he's very proud of his Jewish faith, or at least represents it very well, you know? And I just found it so interesting how as soon as that happened and the Whoopi Goldberg thing happened and all this Mouse book happened, I mean, you know, universe type shit, a lot of stuff has been involving like Jewish people and the Holocaust, and just interesting little things that happened in the series, you know? That was just interesting, you know?
Yeah, man, I'm glad that you brought this book up. I mean, as soon as you, like, it was so funny when I found out that we were going to be reading this.
Yeah, man.
I was like, yeah, like the last episode, I was almost going to talk about Mouse getting banned.
Nice.
And you were like, should I tell you?
You were like, oh. Hey, man, everything happens for a reason. And I'm so grateful that I got to get that little glimpse into the William Montgomery podcast, hear about this. And man, I hope that if you're listening, I hope that you pick up I know he probably just explained the whole book to you, so but I hope that you pick up the book and share it with somebody else. And if you do know anybody that has survived the Holocaust and stuff like that, like blessings to them and all that stuff. And you know, it may not be the only crazy event that happened in the world, but it's a major crazy event that, again, one of the biggest reasons I bring up the Russia and Ukraine stuff, because even if that's even a possibility, I would not want to be in Ukraine's position right now.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, man.
Very.
Yeah, man.
But
yeah,
here we are.
Yeah, man.
We made it to the end.
Bro, that was heavy as fuck, man. Jesus Christ. But this is why the show is so amazing. Like, you know, keep your opinion, I don't give a fuck. But for me, this changed my life right here. You know, this is a big piece of literature that changed my life. So, man, in this crazy earth,
and what's going on in our minds,
this is why I mattered, bro. This is Earth, Mind, and Matter.
And just got a shout out. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, Earth, Mind, Matter Pod.
Yeah, man. Message us, talk to us, say whatever you want. Just tell us your favorite highlight. And or give us a book suggestion, a movie suggestion. You know,
we'll take suggestions.
Too. So I'm be on the lookout for much more things. We're definitely gonna change up how we, you know, release things. You know, everything, all that stuff, man. So excited.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. Good morning, good evening, good night, bro.
Boom.